Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, neurotech.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Hannah Claridge from TTP, and they are a consultancy who consults in lots of things, but they have a big focus in neurotechnology, medical devices, everything like this. We've actually known each other for a while and have been trying to get this done for a while, but then I don't really know what's happened. But it's nice when this stuff happens because then we know each other better versus basically getting introduced on the episode. Hannah, pleasure to have you on the show. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Hannah Claridge. I lead the neurotechnology team here at TTP. And my route into neurotechnology was really through the science route. So my undergraduate degree was in physics originally. I then did a PhD in clinical neurosciences, actually, at the University of Oxford, where I was looking at how we might be able to use MRI scans in order to look at the oxygen metabolism in the brain and how that might be different for healthy individuals, for aging individuals, for people who have had a stroke. And I loved the research that I did during my PhD, but I came to realize how far off that really was from the realities of the clinical workflow and from the realities of what patients needed. So after my PhD, I decided to join TTP in order to work on things that are closer to the market, because I really wanted to work on products that could have a more direct impact on patients' lives. And that's what I've been able to do at TTP.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, let's talk about this clinical translation. What does that entail? And you're saying it wasn't one-to-one, like there were some kind of gaps there. How did that look?
Yeah, so at TTP really exists to help get new products out onto the market. And we do that by supporting other companies in taking their visions, their ideas, and helping them get those products out onto the market. So oftentimes that is about bridging that gap between the research that's been done, often at universities or maybe in very early stage companies, and turning that science into a product that can really be used in the real world for patients. So what we can do at TTP is we can put together custom teams and combining science, different engineering disciplines, and user-centered design as well in order to develop those products. So both developing the underlying technology and then also doing everything that you need in order to get a product through the regulatory side of things and getting that ready to be out on the market.
Interesting. So companies contract you, right? It's not like you guys are looking for, I don't know, good patents or anything like this, right?
No, exactly. So companies will come to TTP and they can be at different stages. One of the stages that we often get really excited about talking to companies at is perhaps a startup just after they've raised a first amount of funding. So they've already maybe done a bit of preclinical work. They've got a sense of what is the product that they have in mind, how does it work, what is in the case of neuromodulation, maybe something about what's the mechanism, what's the indication. They've got the beginnings of a business plan worked out, and we can add bandwidth to their team. We can add skills that they maybe don't have in-house, maybe skills that they find it difficult to hire, or skills that they only need as a one-off. At TTP, our company is about 250 people, to give you a sense of scale. So we've got the luxury of having experts in a really wide range of disciplines, ranging from in science, so optics specialists, or somebody with a biochemistry degree, through to lots of different engineering disciplines, electronic engineering, mechanical engineering, software engineering. And we're able to pull together custom teams to complement the teams that are already in place. A lot of companies have their core expertise. That's something they've been building for a long time. And what we don't want to replace that. We want to add to it. So we want to be able to add the skills around that in order to develop the entire product suite. So for example, some startup companies who are focusing on new lead technologies, we can come and help by developing the IPG to go alongside it, or we can help them scale their manufacturing processes from something that's very handmade in the lab through to something that can be more robustly made in higher volumes. So it's really about adding to the team that they already have in place in order to accelerate their time to market.
Yeah, that's really cool. And actually, I think I might be in this situation one day pretty soon, hopefully. And yes, this could be very useful. Hey guys, just a quick pause to talk about our show sponsor, Iris Biomedical. Iris Biomedical provides a portfolio of neural sensing and simulation platforms and components to accelerate early-stage medical device companies through preclinical and early feasibility studies. Iris is an ideal partner for companies with limited budgets or resources to invest in developing a new platform from the ground up. Their experienced engineering team, in-house cleanroom facilities, and ISO 13485 certified quality management system allow for prototyping and early stage commercial production. Be sure to tell them you heard about it on the Neural Implant Podcast. That'll really help us out. Thanks. Now back to the show. So basically the advantage of this is you have a Rolodex of 250 people within the company, basically that you can talk to or get the information from without having to hire that team of 250 and then be able to ramp up, ramp down whenever you want. So how does this work? Like what's a typical, contract length and what from beginning to end, like a company comes to you, what's the next steps, I guess?
Yeah, so projects really range in terms of size and scope according to what's needed, but a typical project might run for somewhere between 3 months and 12 months, and projects can also continue to run for many years. And we take a phased approach to development during the kind of conversations of working out what are the gaps, what's the scope that our clients wants to engage TTP for. We'll also look at what are the biggest risks to getting this to market and how do we tackle those first. So if there's a fundamental question of we're not sure if this is possible, we want to sense a particular type of signal and we're not sure if we have the SNR to do it, then we would start with a smaller piece of work, maybe 1 to 3 months, just looking into whether it's a literature research, maybe there's some lab work, maybe there's some computer simulations to model that in silico, trying to really understand how big is that risk and do we think it's worthwhile continuing that program. We really try to address those biggest risks first and then move through the development process. So moving through from that feasibility stage at the beginning through to outline designs. Often at that point, we bring in our human factors team. So one of the skill sets that we have here is that human factors expertise. So really understanding what are the needs of the different stakeholders, and by that, both the end users of the devices, but also the clinicians who are going to be prescribing these therapies and the surgeons who are going to be implanting them. So really looking at the whole ecosystem of what this device is going to enable and the people that are going to be involved along the way to make sure that as we're designing that product, it really does meet the needs of all of those different people. So how do you make sure that a device is relatively easy for the surgeon to implant? How do we make that as straightforward as possible so that the surgery can be shorter and have as few risks as possible? And then from the end user perspective, a lot of neuromodulation devices these days have both internal and external components. So there are the implants, but then there are also the handheld programmers. There are also external charging devices oftentimes. How do you make sure that those are straightforward and intuitive for people to use? And what does that mean for the engineering? So working through those areas relatively early on in the product development so that we can minimize the likelihood of having to go around the loop many times further down the line in order to optimize it. So trying to really understand what are those high-level user requirements early on and how do those turn into technical requirements, and then going through that detailed design process through to manufacturing considerations and the V and all of the documentation that's needed for FDA submissions as well. So we tend to phase that into smaller pieces of work so that for each piece of work we can give a more accurate estimate as to the what's going to be needed, how long these projects are going to last, how many resources we're going to need for it, and then stage gating that development process.
Wow, that's incredible. It really sounds like you guys do everything. You could pretty much just take an idea and then bring it almost all the way to market. Like the founding team might not even have to do anything.
There have been cases where we've worked with very small companies where the company is composed of 2 or 3 founders whose sole role is the concept of the idea and the kind of thinking behind what's the business case, and then gathering in the funding and passing that funding through for us to carry out the product development work. Now, that's pretty unusual. In most cases, our clients do have aspects of a product development team, or at least a kind of technology technology team in-house. So the specifics of what we do on each project is very individual, depending on what skills already exist in the company and where they're struggling for bandwidth. But yes, there are a lot of the different stages of that development process that we can do here, which I think is one of the great things that we offer, is that we have all of these skills under one roof, all in one building, and we can help manage that as well from a kind of project management perspective. So we really try to make that as easy as we can for our clients so that we can really accelerate that development cycle.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Okay, so you've done a lot of projects. Do you want to share? Is there a certain number of like maybe neurotech or total projects that you guys have done?
Yeah, so within the neurotech space, we've worked on quite a range of devices. We've worked on spinal cord stimulators, we've worked on deep brain stimulators, we've worked on peripheral nerve stimulation as well for a range of different indications, plus some earlier stage work on different types of sensing modalities. How can you get the most out of that data? Different algorithm designs as well. So when you do have the luxury of being able to sense data, how do you interpret that? What do you do with that information so that it turns into something actionable? So quite a range of different areas. Unfortunately, a lot of these are, pretty much all of them actually, are still under confidentiality. So I'm limited in the number of details I'm allowed to go into, but we've had a really exciting few years in this space actually.
That's cool. Yeah. So what's a common problem that you see that when you see you're just like, I wish you guys would have come to us sooner, or please listen to us?
I don't think it's so much about coming to us sooner. So yes, sometimes we do see some later stage troubleshooting. We've already got a device almost to market or even to market, but something about it is not quite right. Maybe the costs are too high. Maybe the manufacturing process, the yield isn't high enough. But to be honest, the projects that we get most excited about are the earlier stage projects where it's still a vision, it's still a concept. It doesn't necessarily exist in its physical form yet. As I said, my background's in science. I really love hearing about the cool science work that's been going on, whether it's been in a university lab or whether it's been in a kind of early stage research company. But hearing about how people are applying the tools that we have available to new indications, looking at different aspects of the data, stimulating different regimes, looking at the different mechanisms that are going on. And then just when they're starting to think, okay, there's something here, this works in an animal, or this works when we've got these new electrodes implanted and we've got a big computer sitting on the side in the operating theatre while we're doing our short-term experiments. What I really get excited about is being able to turn that into a full product. So understanding what's going on from a science perspective and then keeping that thread running through the whole of the development process. So one thing that you do sometimes see is a real disconnect between the scientists and the engineers. So sometimes you see scientists doing fantastic work, understanding what's the mechanism, how does this therapy work, and then by the time that has been transitioned over to a very capable engineering team, but perhaps an engineering team that hasn't worked on these specific areas of neuromodulation before, things can fall through the cracks. And for example, if you need to be able to balance the efficacy of a treatment with the side effects that are usually created, and if you go too far in one direction or the other, then that treatment stops being helpful. So if you stimulate too strongly and the effect might be really effective, but if the side effects are too strong, then patients aren't going to tolerate that. Patients aren't going to use that device. On the other hand, if you take it to the point where there are no side effects at all, sometimes the therapy stops working. And sometimes with these kind of therapies, it can take a period of time before you really see the effect. And particularly in some of the kind of newer indications where you're perhaps looking at autoimmune disorders or things like epilepsy, where the efficacy increases over time. So if you're setting your stimulation parameters too low, then sure, you don't have the side effects, but you're also missing the efficacy of the treatment. So one of the things that we really try to do is keep some of that science running the whole way through the program to try to avoid those situations where you end up engineering something that no longer really works in the way that you anticipated it would do at the beginning of the process. So of course, as a project progresses, the team becomes more engineering focused as you're working through the really important details of designing and iterating that device. But I think keeping some of that science in mind throughout is really valuable. And the same goes for the user experience side of it as well. Starting that process early and then bringing it in at the points where it makes sense during the product development to make sure that you're checking in as you make design changes or design decisions, checking in with some of those key users to check that this is still relevant for them and for their use cases. And often you're designing things for deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's patients, for example. They have movement disorders. What does that mean for the handheld programmer? What does that mean for how you can place a recharging device onto somebody? You need to think about what are the use cases, what are the patients going to be able to do and not able to do. There's some really cool research going on into what you might be able to do for Alzheimer's or other kind of memory disorders. What does that mean for how often you're able to recharge a device? What level of engagement are you going to be requiring from the users? And how can you design for those needs?
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's probably arguably the most important thing, is to actually design something that people want and not do a technology push, but it's a pull. The patients are like, please give this to me, I'll take my money. And that's something that's very typical of engineers. I have a thing, what can I do with it, versus I have a problem, what thing can I fix with it?
Absolutely. And I think getting that value proposition right, so that the thing that you're designing is actually going to be of value to the people that you're targeting it at. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with starting from a technology and then finding an indication. But I think it has to be done carefully and consciously. And it is very easy to get distracted by, this is a cool, shiny thing that I'm developing. This is something I've spent several years of my life doing, and I really want to push this to market. And the indication and the business case comes very much second. I think that becomes a real challenge as you move out of academia and into industry to make that successful. Like I say, I don't think there's a problem with starting there, but I think really thinking through what is a use case that is particularly well served with this technology. What is an indication? What is a product around this core technology that really makes sense, and where this technology is uniquely well placed to provide that? I think that's really key to making a successful product and a successful company as well in the case of startups.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really cool. So it seems, like I said, you can pretty much replace the whole company. And so this seems, on one hand, like very expensive. It seems like a very pretty much 2/3 or 3/4 or 7/8 of the company's funding could be going towards this. And then you said it goes only for a few months. So how does a company recover from having so much help to not having any help? And I don't know, is that typical too? Or you said, what's that look like too?
Yeah, so what we bring is really that R&D process. What we don't bring is the long-term manufacturing. We don't bring the marketing aspects. We don't bring the kind of ownership of the regulatory file and that strategy. We don't do the sales either. So yes, there's definitely a kind of transition from the R&D process where TTP can really help a company through that, and then over to the kind of longer term manufacturing and marketing and selling. We try to ease that transition as best we can. And one of the things we do is look for long-term manufacturing partners as early as we can. So TTP can do a lot of the prototyping. We can even do some of the kind of early testing. We have been known to manufacture some of the medical devices that can then be used in very early clinical trials, but we're not a long-term manufacturing partner. So identifying CMOs that are appropriate for our clients, part of what we do. And we try to do that as early as possible so that even within the design process, we can incorporate the CMO and their specific expertise. So sometimes they already have a lot of expertise in certain manufacturing processes, at which point we want to be integrating as much of those processes as possible into the design so that transition is easier. Sometimes we're designing something that's completely brand new and there is no company that has that manufacturing process yet, in which case we stretch into the manufacturing side as well. So we have designed manufacturing lines, for example, which we can either run ourselves here, but more often that we then transfer over either to the client directly or to their chosen CMO. So we try to really have that in mind the whole way through and help with that transition. And if we're going through that whole process, that would be longer than 3 to 6 months. That would be a kind of series of phases of work. And we might be working together for 2 or 3 years in order to do that whole process with them.
That makes sense. And that is a problem I've heard, is that people keep the R&D people around too long, and then they want to keep changing things versus just focusing on something. Okay, so that transition does sound pretty logical, and it wouldn't be so abrupt. So that is cool. I guess let's talk about your work, you personally. What does your day-to-day look like? What are you usually doing? And then is this a career that you would recommend for other people to get into?
Yeah, absolutely. I think during my time at TTP, I've really tried out a few different roles that you can do here. So when I first joined, I was really working on a lot of projects, working in the lab, doing some computer simulations as well. As I said, a bit of a physics background. So I've worked on really quite a wide range of medical devices. I've worked on drug delivery devices. I've worked on inhalers. I've worked on insulin delivery devices for people with diabetes. I've worked on continuous blood pressure monitors, which can be really useful to be monitoring somebody during a surgery, or a mother in a delivery room as well. Changes in blood pressure are often the first indication that something somewhere is going wrong. So there's the kind of working on project side, which I really enjoyed. There's also leading projects. So being able to really manage that process of pulling together the team within TTP, talking to the clients regularly, making sure that communication is a really strong two-way communication, so that the clients are up to date on what's going on and able to have inputs and design directions into the programs. And then over the last 4, maybe 5 years, I've really been part of growing that neurotechnology team. So together with a few of my colleagues, Alex Doko, Chris Dawson, and Alon Grinenko, we've really been developing this as a core focus area for TTP. And as part of that, my role has really transitioned into more of the business development. So I now get to talk to not just people like you, but also talk to lots of startups in this space, talk to some of the big players as well, understand what the strategics are worried about focusing on. And really, I get to learn, which I love learning. That's why I did science in the first place. So I get to learn, what are different companies up to? What are their challenges? What are their successes? And in which cases is TTP well placed to help? So where can we provide support, provide assistance in order to help them get these really cool new products out onto the market? So my role now is mostly business development, and then also some internal team support. So as a market team lead, I also support the team around me, make sure that the project leaders have the support that they need, make sure that the team has the right skills balance. So there's elements of recruitment involved in that as well.
Okay. You find yourself going into the position that you like more. And as they say, I think, what do they say? 5 years in consulting is 20 years in industry or something like this, because you're always putting out fires. You see so many problems that you really learn quickly what's important and not. And you had talked a little bit about your genesis, how you got into it. But for others, maybe how would you recommend? Usually consulting is not something that people start out with, or what's a typical pathway into it?
Yeah, so I think consulting is really fantastic for the variety that it offers you, not just in terms of seeing problems, but also working with different types of companies, different types of technologies, and having different day-to-day activities as well. So being able to balance some of that lab work, technical work, theoretical work with putting together client update presentations, thinking about what's the big picture, why does this matter, how can we make this work? So I think that variety is something that really draws people to work at TTP. In terms of how to get into this space, I think one of the things that I always recommend to people, if they're early enough in their careers, is to just do internships, do short-term internships for a matter of weeks or maybe a small number of months to get a taste for things. So to try out different industries, to try out different types of companies, different sizes of companies, and to find out for yourself, what do you enjoy? What aspects do you enjoy of different roles and different companies? I certainly learned a lot through the internships that I did back when I was an undergraduate, and have taken that through. And also when interviewing, interviews are a two-way process. Yes, the company is trying to work out if you'd be a good fit, but you should also be trying to find out, is this company a good fit for you? Is this where you want to be spending a large fraction of hopefully several years of your life working with these people on these problems. Is that something that you enjoy? And I think, what's different people want different things out of a career, out of a job. I think some of the really exciting things about TTP is that we do give people a lot of autonomy, a lot of control over their time. People get to choose how do they balance their workloads between different projects, which types of projects are most exciting to them, do they most want to work on, and shifting between those different roles of working on projects, leading projects, doing business development, finding new projects. People can balance those to some extent as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a good idea, is to do lots of internships and sample everything. And also, they know you at that point, and so they'll be much more likely to hire you versus just reading a resume and be like, oh, this is the person. Because again, they're, like you said, they're spending the same amount of time with you, and they might be stuck on a flight, transatlantic flight with you for 12 hours, or have to spend 24 hours with you and only you. So they don't want to have that be a punishment too. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so a question I like to ask is sometimes, if you had unlimited funding, or if a company had unlimited funding, what would you do? Or what's like an ideal situation for you that company says, money's no object, we're funded by Saudi Arabia or something like this. What can you do for us?
What would I like to work on? What would I want to have funding to do? Yeah. I think depression is a huge area that's only just starting to be really investigated in this space. I've seen some really interesting early data from individual case reports of using different forms of neuromodulation, whether that's deep brain stimulation, vagus nerve stimulation, different methods to treat depression. And I think it's such a huge unmet need to have more treatment options for depression at different stages. There are some stages of depression where a non-invasive treatment would be really necessary. There are severe cases where actually having some sort of a fit and forget device, such as a deep brain stimulator or something similar, could have a huge impact on patients' lives. So I would love to have the time and the resources to really dig into that, both from the science, but also from the how do you make that work as a business case, and what are the approaches that are most likely to work for that indication.
Yeah, that one sounds like a bit more invasive, almost like a deep brain stimulator or something like this. So that could be a harder sell. Deep brain stimulation, Parkinson's, that's a quite clear debilitating thing, but I guess depression too. But yeah, I guess the level of depression.
I think it depends what level of depression. Yeah. I think if you look at the kind of suicide rates and people who are at that stage with symptoms that are not managed by pharmaceuticals, I think there is a space for that. But obviously the ideal would be to stop people ever getting to that stage, and therefore having something that's either minimally invasive, something that could perhaps be injected, whether that's into the vagus nerve or some other part of the body, but something that's minimally invasive, or something that's non-invasive, that, all these things are possibilities. There's been some cool work done on TMS as well for treating depression. So at the moment, that's still somewhat time consuming and needs a very specialist piece of equipment. It's not invasive, but that's still got other barriers to entry. But what could we do to push that further, and the things that we could do to bring that closer to home?
I think the control in this would be getting a puppy and seeing if it's better or worse than that. Cool. Hannah, this has been excellent. I've really enjoyed this. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
I don't think so. Just to maybe finish up by saying that we are hiring. We're always looking for more people to join the team with all different levels of experience. So people who are straight out of an undergrad would already be interesting to us, right through to people with PhDs or with previous industry experience, and particularly in the areas of electronics and firmware. Those are areas that we're doing a lot of work in at the moment. So if that sounds fun, then please feel free to get in touch with me.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.